You know, I don't usually talk much about myself. Been on this road for so long, you kinda just learn to keep things locked down inside, tucked away like old maps in a glove compartment. But something happened to me recently, something that just reached right into my chest and squeezed. It's been gnawing at me, a constant hum under the surface, until I just couldn't hold it in anymore. It's one of those things that really shakes you up, makes you see the world and yourself in a whole different light. Like suddenly the fog lifts and everything's clearer, sharper. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, to be honest. It wasn't some big, loud, dramatic event you see on the news, no sirens or flashing lights, but it hit me deep, harder than any 18-wheeler ever could, right where I live. I'm a truck driver, been pushing this old rig for over 20 years now, give or take. Most of that time has been spent just pushing forward, mile after mile, with a quiet, heavy sort of ache in my chest that became as familiar as the rumble of the engine. You see countless sunrises and sunsets from behind this windshield, endless stretches of highway that blur into one long winding ribbon, and faces at truck stops that all start to blend together after a while. For most of my life, the road was all I had left, a kind of constant movement that kept me from having to sit still with the regrets that gnawed at me, the ghost of what I'd lost always riding shotgun. My old Scania, she's been my only steady companion, a loyal beast that's seen more of my silent moments than any living soul. You see, there's a hole in my life, a wound that never really healed, and her name is Mariana. She's my daughter, or was, in my mind, for a long time. It's been more than 20 years since her mother, my ex-wife, just packed up and left, taking Mariana with her. I remember the fight like it was yesterday, the last one, her voice cracking as she said she couldn't take my absence anymore. All those long hauls, the endless nights away, the promises I made but couldn't keep. I told myself I was doing it for them, working hard, but in the end, I wasn't there enough, not for either of them. And then, just like that, they were gone. Her mom cut off all contact, moved them far away, and for 2 whole decades it was like Mariana had just vanished from the face of the earth, a ghost in my own memories. After she left, the road became my whole life, a kind of self-imposed exile, I guess. Every mile I put behind me was another stark reminder of what I'd lost, another nail in the coffin of any hope I had of ever seeing her again, of mending what was broken. I got hard, tough, like the asphalt itself, letting the loneliness of the highway seep into my bones, convinced myself that I'd blown it, that there was no way back for a man like me, a man who couldn't even hold on to his own family. The thought of ever reconnecting with Mariana, it just seemed like a fool's dream, something that happened in movies, not in the gritty, unforgiving reality of my life. So I just kept driving, day in and day out, letting the hum of the engine and the endless roar of the wind drown out the gnawing silence in my soul, believing that was all I deserved. One sweltering afternoon just a few months back, I pulled into a dusty old gas station, the kind that looks like it's been standing there forever, seen a million stories pass through its lot. It was deep in the heartland, far from any big city. Lights, just endless fields stretching out to the horizon. The sun was beating down something fierce, shimmering off the asphalt, and the air was thick with the usual smells, diesel, hot tar, and that dry, earthy scent that always reminds you how far you are from home, or at least from what used to be home. I'd been driving since before dawn, one of those long hauls that just drains you, body and soul, leaves you feeling strung out and wired at the same time. All I wanted was a cold soda to, stretch these aching legs and maybe just a few minutes of quiet before hitting the road again, pushing through the last few hours of my run. I parked my rig, killed the engine, and the sudden silence that followed, after hours of engine rumble and wind noise, was almost deafening, a heavy blanket that settled over everything. As I swung open the heavy door of my cab and stepped out, rubbing the stiffness from my neck, my eyes drifted over to the passenger side mirror. It was just a quick, unconscious habit, something I always do before heading inside, a last check. And that's when I saw it. Tucked under the edge of the mirror, fluttering gently in the faint, hot breeze, was a folded piece of paper. It looked out of place, not like a flyer for some roadside diner or a generic ad, but something smaller, more personal somehow. My heart did a weird little flip in my chest. That kind of jolt you get when something unexpected lands right in front of you. Curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of suspicion. You see all sorts of strange things on the road, believe me. Made me reach for it. My fingers trembled slightly. A tremor I hated to admit was there, as I carefully unfolded it. The handwriting wasn't familiar to me, not at all, but it was neat, clear, easy to read even with the sun glaring down. And then I read the name at the bottom, a name I hadn't dared to whisper in 20 years without feeling a sharp, familiar pain deep inside. Mariana. My breath hitched, caught somewhere in my throat. The world around me, the other trucks humming in the distance, the gas pumps, the shimmering heat waves rising off the blacktop, all of it just faded away into a dull, muffled buzz. All I could focus on were those few words on that small, ordinary piece of paper, held tight in my trembling hand. The words on the note blurred for a second, then sharpened. It said she knew it was me, Mariana, and that she worked right there, at that very gas station. Knew I passed through every month, like clockwork. Said she'd never forgotten me, and that she was still waiting. Still waiting. That phrase, it hit me like a physical blow. 20 years of silence, of just believing she was gone, erased, and then this. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was it a joke? A cruel trick? But who would know? Who would even bother? The handwriting was so neat, so deliberate. It felt real, in a way that scared the hell out of me. My hands started to sweat, gripping the paper, so tight I thought I might crumple it. My chest felt tight, like a band was squeezing it. I must have stood there for a good 5 minutes just staring at that note. The sounds of the gas station slowly filtering back into my awareness. Trucks roaring, air brakes hissing, the distant chatter of people. My head was spinning. Part of me, the part that had built up all those walls over the years, just wanted to get back in the rig, tear that note up, and drive away as fast as I could. Pretend it never happened. The fear of rejection, of facing the hurt I'd caused, it was overwhelming. But another part, a small, fragile flicker of hope I hadn't known still existed, kept me rooted to the spot. She never forgot me. She's still waiting. It was a lifeline thrown into a dark, bottomless pit. I folded the note carefully, tucked it into my shirt pocket, right over my heart, and walked into the station, trying to act like nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. My eyes, though, were scanning every face. The next few days were a blur of highway miles and a mind that just wouldn't settle. Every time I pulled into a truck stop, every time I saw a woman roughly her age, my eyes would dart around, searching. It was crazy, I know. My route usually took me back that way about once a month, but this time, I found myself making excuses, taking detours, doing whatever I could to pass by that same gas station again. The thought of just showing up, unannounced after all these years, filled me with dread. What would I even say? How do you explain 20 years of silence? 20 years of just not being there? The fear of her turning me away, of seeing the hurt in her eyes. It was a heavy weight in my stomach, worse than any bad load I'd ever hauled. But the note, man, that note kept burning a hole in my pocket. She never forgot me. She's still waiting. Those words echoed in my head with every turn of the wheels. They were a siren song, pulling me back, even though every instinct screamed to run. I finally gave in, maybe 3 days later. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, as I pulled into that familiar gas station lot again. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. I killed the engine, but this time, the silence wasn't deafening. It was just pregnant with possibility. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the station entrance, trying to gather up what little courage I had left. This was it. No turning back now. I took a deep breath, or tried to, but it felt like my lungs weren't working right. Every step towards that door felt like I was walking through thick mud, each foot heavy with years of unspoken words and buried guilt. My old work boots scraped on the concrete, a sound that seemed ridiculously loud in the quiet hum of the evening. I kept telling myself, just go in, just look. If she's not there, you can just leave. No harm done. But my gut knew better. This wasn't just about looking. It was about finally facing the music, facing her. The fear was a cold knot, tightening with every agonizing step. I pushed through the glass door, the bell above jingling softly. and my eyes immediately swept across the small, brightly lit store, searching, hoping, dreading. There she was, standing behind the counter, bagging something for a customer. She had her hair pulled back, just like her mother used to, and even from across the room, I could see the curve of her smile as she handed over the change. It was her. There was no mistaking it. 20 years melted away in that instant, replaced by a wave of raw emotion that nearly buckled my knees. My eyes, they just locked onto her like a magnet. She looked older, of course, a woman now, not the little girl I remembered, but the shape of her face, the way she tilted her head slightly. It was all Mariana. The customer left, and she turned, starting to wipe down the counter, humming a little tune. She still hadn't seen me, and for a fleeting second, that old fear, that desire to just vanish, crept back in. My breath caught in my throat. My feet, they felt like they were nailed to the floor. I couldn't move. My voice, if I tried to speak, felt like it would just crack and disappear. She looked up then, her eyes scanning the store, and they landed on me. For a split second, there was just a blank look, the way anyone looks at a new customer. Then, something in her eyes changed. A flicker, like a light coming on. Then a widening, a slow recognition that stole the breath right out of her. Her hand, which was holding the wiping rag, just froze on the counter. Her humming stopped. The color seemed to drain from her face, and her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. It was like time itself had just stopped, right there in that little gas station convenience store, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Neither of us said a word for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick with it all. 20 years of absence, of unspoken apologies, of raw, aching longing. My throat was so tight I thought I might choke. All I could do was stare back at her, this woman who was my daughter, finally standing in front of me after all this time. Her eyes, those same eyes I remembered from when she was a little girl, were filled with a mix of shock and something else I couldn't quite name, something almost like a gentle, hesitant hope. My own eyes started to burn, and I felt that familiar stinging behind them, the kind that tells you tears are coming whether you want them to or not. It was a silent, agonizing standoff, two strangers and a lifetime of history hanging between us, heavy and fragile all at once. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she started to move. She came out from behind the counter, her steps careful, like she was walking on eggshells. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I braced myself, half expecting her to yell, to turn away, to just tell me to leave. But she didn't. She just kept walking towards me, her eyes never leaving mine, those big brown eyes that looked so much like her mother's. As she got closer, I could see the faint sprinkle of freckles across her nose, just like when she was a little girl playing in the backyard. The closer she got, the more real this moment became, stripping away all the years of self-pity and regret, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, like a raw nerve. She stopped, right in front of me, maybe a foot or so away. We were so close I could see the faint tremor in her hands. She lifted one hand, slowly, almost hesitantly, and for a second, I flinched, expecting a push, a gesture of anger. Instead, her hand reached out, not to my face but to my arm, resting gently on my old worn-out work jacket. It was a light touch, barely there, but it felt like an electric current shot straight through me, right to my core. And then, without a single word, without a shout, or a question or a tear, she leaned in, and she hugged me. It was a quiet hug, not dramatic, not crushing, but it was everything. The scent of her, like fresh laundry and something vaguely sweet, filled my senses. My arms, stiff and awkward, slowly, instinctively, went around her. And just like that, the 20 years of cold distance, of silent longing, of endless highway miles, they just melted away into that one embrace. Time stopped. The world outside that gas station, the trucks, the road, it all just disappeared. It was just us. The hug wasn't long, not really, but it felt like an eternity and a split second all at once. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were a little watery, but she wasn't crying. Not really. She just looked at me, a soft, understanding look that cut right through all the defenses I'd built up over the years. There was no anger, no accusation, no demands for explanations that I couldn't even begin to give. Just acceptance. It was a kind of grace I hadn't known I deserved, a quiet forgiveness that spoke louder than any words ever could. My own eyes were stinging, a hot blur behind them, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not yet, not in front of her, not when this fragile moment was finally here. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out another folded piece of paper, thicker this time, worn a little at the edges like it had been held many times. She gently pressed it into my hand. "Just don't disappear again, Dad," she said, her voice soft, a little shaky, but firm. That word, Dad, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't heard it from her in so long, I honestly thought I'd never hear it again. It was the only thing she asked for, the only condition. She didn't ask about the past, didn't demand to know where I'd been, or why. Just that one plea. I nodded because my throat was too tight to speak. I clutched the letter, still warm from her hand, a new promise forming in my heart right then and there. After that moment, the days started to change. I still drove. That's just who I am, what I do. But the road felt different now. It wasn't just miles ticking by in a lonely silence anymore. Every sunset I saw, every small town I passed through, felt like it had a new meaning, a quiet kind of beauty I hadn't noticed in years. I started making sure my routes brought me back to that gas station more often. It wasn't always easy to time it right, but I made it work. And each time I'd stop, not just for gas, but to see Mariana. We didn't talk much at first, just small things, everyday stuff. It was like we were learning how to be father and daughter again, slowly, carefully, like putting together a puzzle piece by piece after a long time. She never pushed me, never asked about the past, not really. It was always just about the present, about the quiet space we were building. She'd tell me about her day at the station, about the funny customers, about the local gossip, and I'd listen, really, listen. For the first time in a long time, I found myself telling her about the road, about the crazy weather I'd driven through, about the strange characters you meet at truck stops. Little by little, the walls around my heart started to crumble. It wasn't a sudden thing, but a slow, steady thaw, like ice melting in the spring sun. I learned she was a strong woman, independent, with a quiet strength that reminded me of her mother, but also a deep well of kindness that was all her own. One day, she told me something that it knocked the wind right out of me. We were sitting on a beat-up bench outside the station, sharing a couple of Cokes, and she just said it, quiet like, "Dad, I'm pregnant." My first thought was just pure shock, followed by a rush of fear. How could I be a grandfather? I, who barely knew how to be a father. But then she just smiled, a gentle, tired smile, and in that moment, I saw a new kind of strength in her, a quiet determination that made my heart ache. She was going to be a mother, and I was going to be a grandfather. It was a lot to take in, a whole new chapter opening up when I thought my book was already closed. Then she told me about the other thing, a rare autoimmune disease. She said it matter-of-factly, almost casually, but I could hear the tremor in her voice, the unspoken worry. It was something she'd been dealing with for a while, something that made this pregnancy a bigger challenge than most. My gut twisted. After all these years, just when I was finally getting her back, but she didn't dwell on it. She spoke about it with such incredible resilience, such courage. She was facing this huge battle, and she was still so strong, so determined, focused on this new life growing inside her. It made my own past regrets feel even smaller, more selfish. She was fighting, and I realized, looking at her, that I had to fight too. Fight to be there for her, for this new grandchild. We talked more about the baby after that. She told me she had already picked out a name. If it was a boy, Arthur, my name. She said it was to honor me, to bring something good from the past into the future, a way to mend things. Hearing my own name, chosen for her child, after all the mistakes I'd made, it was humbling. It felt like a deep, unexpected act of forgiveness. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. It was too much, too soon, but also exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger, a new generation, a chance for redemption I never thought I'd get. I looked her straight in the eye, and without thinking, I made a promise. "Mariana," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, if anything happens, I'll take care of him. I I promise you that." She just nodded, her eyes soft, and then she smiled. It wasn't a big, bright smile, but a gentle, knowing one. And then she told me her biggest wish. She wanted the baby, Arthur, to be baptized at her childhood church. It was a place she'd always dreamed of visiting. A place of peace and hope, she said. It was a big ask, a long journey from our part of the country. But looking at her, seeing the quiet hope in her eyes, there was no way I could say no. I promised her I would. The next few months were a strange mix of hope and dread. Mariana kept working at the station as long as she could, her belly growing, and with it, a quiet excitement that was contagious. We spent as much time together as my schedule allowed, just talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. She never complained about her condition, not once, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. The tiredness in her eyes, the way she'd sometimes wince, just a little. It was hard to watch, knowing there wasn't a darn thing I could do but be there. My promise to her about Arthur and the church, it was more than just words now. It was a heavy weight, but also a guiding light. Then came the call. Late one night, the kind of call every truck driver dreads, especially when you're out on the road, miles from anywhere. It was a nurse, her voice calm but serious. Mariana had gone into labor, much earlier than expected, and there were complications. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold dread washing over me. I turned the rig around right then and there, pushing that old Scania harder than I ever had, breaking every speed limit, ignoring the world around me. All I could think about was getting back, just getting back. To her. The highway blurred, the miles flying by, but it felt like the longest night of my life, a terrifying race against something I couldn't control. I got there finally, the morning sun just starting to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot. My legs felt like jelly when I finally killed the engine. Rushed inside, my old work boots echoing on the polished floor, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. They took me to a waiting room, told me to sit, but I couldn't. I just paced, a caged animal, listening to every muffled sound, every whisper from the nurse's station. Time stretched, endless and agonizing. A doctor finally came out, his face tired, and my world tilted. Mariana had given birth to a healthy baby boy, Arthur, but the complications from her illness, they were too much. She was gone, just like that. The words hung in the air, cold and stark, cutting right through me. My knees buckled then, and I found myself sinking into a chair, the plastic cold beneath my hands. Gone. After all this time, all that raw, fragile hope, she was gone. The grief hit me like a physical punch, taking my breath away. It wasn't just the sorrow of losing her, but the crushing weight of 20 years of lost time, of apologies unsaid, of a future snatched away just as it was beginning. It was a pain so deep, so raw, it made every other hurt I'd ever known feel like a paper cut. But then, a nurse gently touched my arm. "Your grandson, sir. He's, beautiful." And just like that, the world shifted again. A tiny new life. Arthur, Mariana's last gift. I had to be strong. For her, for him. They brought him to me, a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. He was so small, so fragile. A little face all scrunched up, soft wisps of dark hair. He was sleeping, breathing softly. Looking at him, it was like looking at Mariana all over again. But also, a faint echo of myself from a lifetime ago. A new wave of emotion hit me, not just grief, but this fierce, protective love I hadn't known I was capable of. This was Arthur, my grandson. The promise I made to Mariana about taking care of him. It became crystal clear then. It wasn't just a promise anymore. It was my purpose. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, hushed conversations, and trying to learn how to hold a baby without feeling like he'd shatter in my rough hands. Mariana's few belongings, a small box of things from her apartment, were all I had left of her. And the letter, the one she gave me at the gas station. I reread it countless times, her words, her hope, her quiet strength. It made the promise to take Arthur to the church feel even more sacred, more urgent. It wasn't just a trip, it was a pilgrimage, a way to honor her memory and give this little boy a connection to the mother he'd never know. The paperwork to gain custody of little Arthur was a nightmare, a labyrinth of bureaucracy that left me utterly drained, more so than any cross-country haul. But I pushed through it. fueled by that silent promise I made to Mariana, with the stubborn determination of a truck driver facing a mountain pass in a blizzard. Family I didn't really have anymore, not in the traditional sense. Friends, few and far between, mostly fellow road dogs who understood the isolation of this life. Yet the legal system, in the end, must have seen something in my raw, unwavering resolve, my deep-seated will to give little Arthur the best shot at life I possibly could. And just like that, with a confusing mix of fear and a fragile, burgeoning hope, I became a parent again, this time as a grandfather. My old, quiet home, which had echoed only with the lonely silence of my own thoughts, now carried the soft, tiny cries of a baby, a sound that, strangely, brought a deep, unexpected sense of peace to my worn-out soul. Right after that, I started planning the trip to church, a journey that now held a significance far greater than I could have ever imagined when Mariana first spoke of it. It wasn't just a promise to her anymore. It was a sacred vow, a baptism for Arthur, and deep down, a pilgrimage for my own scarred soul. The distance, about 100 miles from where I was then, wasn't much for someone who lived on the road, but I knew each mile would be heavy with memories, with unspoken regrets, and with a fragile, yet powerful, new hope. I started adapting my old rig, not for a regular cargo, but for the most precious treasure I would ever carry, my grandson. And for the first time in more years than I could count, the long, winding highway stretching out before me didn't feel daunting. It felt like a calling, a path towards something resembling redemption, a chance to make things right. The journey to the church felt different from any other road trip I'd ever made. It wasn't about deadlines or deliveries. It was about honoring a promise, about carrying a piece of Mariana with me, and about finding a new path forward with this tiny, innocent life in my care. Arthur was a quiet baby mostly. He'd sleep in his car seat next to me, the gentle rumble of the Scania a constant lullaby. Sometimes I'd glance over just to make sure he was still there, still breathing, still real. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was a good kind of heavy, a meaningful weight that settled deep in my chest. I talked to him softly, about Mariana, about the mom he'd never know, about her dreams, about this place we were going. I whispered my own apologies into the silent cab, hoping somehow, somewhere she could hear them. When we finally arrived, Mariana's childhood church was even more magnificent than I'd imagined from Mariana's descriptions. It was huge, majestic, standing tall under the vast sky. People were everywhere, a quiet hum of devotion, walking with purpose, some with tears in their eyes. It felt like a place where burdens could be laid down, where hope truly lived. I carried Arthur, carefully, close to my chest, his small head resting against my shoulder. Walking into that vast space, with him in my arms, felt like I was stepping into a new life, leaving behind the hardened shell of the man I used to be. Every step I took, I felt Mariana's presence, not as a ghost, but as a gentle warmth, a quiet strength guiding me forward. The baptism itself was simple, quiet, but it felt monumental. Arthur, held in my arms, barely stirred as the water touched his tiny forehead. In that moment, surrounded by the hushed reverence of the sanctuary, I felt a connection to Mariana that was stronger than any physical presence. It was like she was there, smiling, watching over us, her dream finally coming true. It wasn't just a religious ceremony. It was a promise fulfilled, a new beginning for both of us. All those years of regret, of feeling like I was forever lost, they started to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose, a gentle, unwavering calm that settled over my soul. This little boy, Mariana's son, was my anchor now. Leaving the church, the feeling was different. The weight I'd carried for so long was still there, the grief for Mariana, but it was now mixed with a profound sense of peace and a fierce determination. My life on the road had to change. Arthur couldn't live in hotels or at truck stops. So I started planning. I made some major modifications to my old Scania, took out the passenger seat, built a small cot, a safe little space for him, added a small fridge, a place for his bottles and food. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional, a small home on wheels. I learned to cook simple meals on a portable stove, to change diapers, to sing lullabies, all things I never thought I'd do. My fellow drivers, They looked at me funny at first, seeing a baby in the cab, but most just offered a nod, a silent understanding of what I was doing. Life on the road with a baby was nothing like I ever imagined. It was hard, no doubt about it. There were sleepless nights, fussy moments, and the constant worry of keeping him safe and healthy in a truck stop world. But then there were the quiet mornings, watching the sunrise paint the sky through the windshield, with Arthur gurgling happily in his cot. There were the truck stop diners where folks, seeing a grizzled old driver with a baby, would always offer a smile or a kind word. I learned to live with a tenderness I hadn't felt in decades. I'd talk to him all the time, tell him stories about the road, about the places we'd seen, and always about his mother, Mariana. I wanted him to know her, even though she was gone, to feel her presence in every story, every shared memory. He grew up in that truck, my little Arthur, the hum of the engine his constant companion. He learned to count by looking at the mile markers, learned his colors from the different road signs. He was a smart kid, curious about everything, and he always had that spark in his eyes, just like Mariana. I made sure to teach him about respect, about kindness, about living with dignity, even when life throws you curveballs. I wanted him to understand that even when things are tough, there's always light, always hope, especially if you carry love in your heart. And we carried Mariana's love with us, every single mile. It wasn't just me raising him, it was us, together, her spirit guiding us both. When Arthur turned 5, he started asking about the church, about the place where his mother had wanted him to be baptized. He'd heard my stories, of course, countless times, but now he wanted to see it for himself, to feel what I had felt. It was his own idea, a quiet request, not a demand. And just like that, we were on the road again, headed back to the sanctuary. It wasn't the same desperate, grief-laden journey as the first time. This time it was filled with a different kind of purpose, a quiet joy. He was so excited, bouncing in his little seat, pointing out everything he saw along the way, asking a million questions, just like any 5-year-old on a big adventure. It warmed my old heart more than he'll ever know. He'd spent days drawing a picture, a colorful, simple drawing of a truck with a little boy and a woman with long hair, all under a big, smiling sun. He carried it carefully, clutched in his small hand, all the way into the sanctuary. When we got to the altar, he looked up at me, his eyes wide and bright, and held out the drawing. "For Mom," he whispered, pushing it towards the altar. I helped him place it there, among the flowers and candles, a small offering from a boy who never knew his mother, but loved her fiercely anyway. And then, we just stood there, together, my hand on his shoulder, watching the evening light filter through the stained glass. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the stars began to pop out one by one, in the vast inky sky, a single bright star appeared, shining just above the sanctuary. It felt like a sign, a quiet wink from above. Looking down at Arthur, his little hand still clutching mine, I understood. Mariana wasn't just a memory, a name I whispered in the quiet of my truck. She was alive. She was alive in his bright, curious eyes, in his gentle spirit, in the way he talked about her like she was still right there with us. She was alive in the endless love that flowed between us, a love that had defied time, distance, and even death. And in that moment, under that solitary star, everything finally made sense. The regret, the loneliness, the years of driving aimlessly, it all led to this, to Arthur, to the promise I kept, to the realization that even when you lose everything, if you hold on to love, really hold on to it, it never truly dies. It transforms, it grows, it comes back to you in unexpected ways, in the quiet innocence of a child, in the simple act of a drawing left on an altar. I didn't know what the future held for me and Arthur, but I knew we'd face it together, on the road, with her love as our guide. It just happened, and I'm still here, still driving. But now, every mile is filled with a purpose, a peace, and a love I never thought I'd find again.